Ever catch yourself missing that spark? You know, that initial excitement you feel when you first start dating someone, when everything's new and exciting.
It's so easy to let that fade as time goes on.
Exactly. And that's exactly why we're diving deep into how to keep the spark alive in a long-term relationship.
Oh, I love that book.
It's packed with practical advice, real strategies you can use to make sure your relationship stays strong and fulfilling over time. No fluff, just real, actionable stuff.
And what I find fascinating is the text's emphasis on consistent small steps over grand gestures. It's not about waiting for anniversaries or special occasions to show your love. It's about weaving those little romantic moments into your everyday life.
So not just waiting for anniversaries for roses, then. I like it. The book really digs into the importance of communication right from the start.
It's foundational to any strong relationship. And this text goes beyond just talking about your day. It's about genuinely understanding your partner's needs and feelings. They emphasize active listening.
Active listening. Okay. So tell me more about that. What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, it's not enough to just hear the words. You have to engage with their emotions, too. Really try to see things from their perspective.
It reminds me of a concept from the book. They call it emotional mirroring. It's about reflecting back what you hear your partner saying, not just to prove you're listening, but to make sure you're truly understanding their perspective. It seems so simple, but it's incredibly powerful.
It really is. And just as important as listening is being honest yourself. I know it can be tough to bring up difficult topics, but the text really emphasizes that transparency builds trust.
Right, because that honesty, even when it's hard, it builds this foundation of trust. And when you trust each other, you feel safe.
Exactly. What resonated with me was this line from the book. Honesty isn't always easy, but it's the quickest way to close the distance in a relationship.
Holding back creates this breeding ground for doubt, right? It makes total sense. And speaking of going deeper, the text then dives into emotional intimacy.
Yes. It's so easy to get caught up in the everyday routine. But this book reminds us to prioritize those moments of genuine connection. It's about sharing those deeper thoughts and feelings, even the stuff you might not tell just anyone.
And it's like anyone can know your favorite color, but do they know the dream you've had since you were a kid? The one you're kind of embarrassed to admit even to yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
Sharing those vulnerabilities, that's where real intimacy blossoms.
Absolutely. And this ties directly back to the importance of active listening we talked about earlier. When you truly feel heard and understood, it creates a safe space to be your most authentic self. And when both partners feel safe to be vulnerable, it deepens the bond in a way that's just irreplaceable. But this deep dive isn't all about emotional heart-to-hearts. The text also acknowledges the importance of keeping the romance alive in practical, sustainable ways.
Okay, so let's talk about keeping that spark ignited. I have to admit, when I hear keeping the romance alive, my mind immediately jumps to grand gestures, like a surprise weekend getaway or an extravagant biff.
Oh, I know what you mean. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking we need these big, splashy displays of affection.
But this text takes a different approach, doesn't it? It emphasizes those small, everyday acts of love.
Absolutely. It's about consistency. Those little things you do for each other, day in and day out, that add up to something much bigger over time.
So it's less about one big splurge and more about consistent investments, kind of like an emotional bank account, right? I like that. So what are we talking about here? What are some examples of those small gestures that can make such a difference?
Think about it this way. It's those little things that bring a smile to your partner's face. Leaving a surprise note, greeting each other with a warm hug and kiss when you get home, expressing your appreciation for the things they do, even something as simple as making them a cup of coffee in the morning.
Which actually makes a lot of sense, right? It's much easier to maintain a roaring fire when you're consistently adding fuel to it, instead of letting it dwindle down to nothing and then trying to throw a giant log on top in a panic.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of keeping things flowing, this leads perfectly into another crucial aspect the text highlights: physical intimacy.
Let's be honest, physical connection is a vital part of any romantic relationship.
Absolutely. And you know, what I appreciate is that the text acknowledges that sexual desire can fluctuate over time. Life happens. It normalizes those ebbs and flows, encouraging couples to talk openly and honestly about their needs and desires.
Because let's be real, no one is a mind reader, right? Hoping your partner will just figure it out is a surefire recipe for frustration and resentment.
Exactly. Communication is key here. The text actually gives some really helpful tips on how to start those conversations about physical intimacy, even if it feels a little awkward or uncomfortable at first.
Oh, I'm curious about that. What kind of tips do they offer?
Well, for one, they suggest setting aside dedicated time to talk, maybe even creating a safe and comfortable space where you can both feel relaxed and open.
That makes sense. Sometimes just having that intentional time and space can make all the difference.
It really can. They also suggest maybe using prompts or questions from the book to get the conversation flowing.
I love that they offer those practical tools. So practical. Okay, so far we've covered communication, emotional intimacy, keeping the romance alive, and physical connection. That's a lot. But there's one more part of the text I found really interesting, almost a bit counterintuitive. It's about the importance of maintaining your individuality within the context of a relationship.
Yes, it's so important. We hear all the time about the importance of being on the same page as our partners, of being two halves of a whole.
You complete me and all that.
Exactly. And while that's definitely important to a certain extent, we also have to remember that we're still individuals with our own passions, interests, and goals. And nurturing those individual aspects of ourselves is actually crucial for the long-term health of the relationship.
It's like that saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But if the parts themselves are kind of wilted, then the whole thing loses its vibrancy, right?
Exactly. It's about striking a balance. The text emphasizes the importance of supporting each other's personal growth, whether that's pursuing a hobby, taking some time for yourself, or chasing after individual dreams. It's about creating a dynamic where both partners feel fulfilled, both individually and as a couple.
Which makes a lot of sense. You're bringing your best, most authentic self to the table when you prioritize your own well-being. But let's be realistic. Even the strongest, most in-sync couples are going to face their fair share of challenges. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it?
It sure does. It's not always smooth sailing, is it? And that's where the book's emphasis on teamwork really comes in. When those challenges arise, and they inevitably do, it's about facing them together as a united front.
So it's less about trying to avoid disagreements altogether and more about how you handle them.
Exactly. The text encourages couples to see themselves as teammates, working collaboratively to overcome obstacles. It even talks about visualizing yourself standing side by side, literally facing those challenges together as a united front.
I love that visual. It's a powerful reminder that you're in it together, not against each other. But speaking of teamwork, I imagine even the most in-sync couples will have moments where, well, forgiveness becomes necessary. We're all human after all. What does the text say about navigating those situations where someone messes up?
It highlights the absolute necessity of forgiveness. It reminds us that we're all human, we all make mistakes. Holding on to grudges, it only creates more distance and resentment, and that doesn't benefit anyone in the relationship.
There's a line from the book that really struck me. Forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of their actions. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of the past. It's about making a conscious choice to move forward and rebuild that trust together.
That's such a great point. Forgiveness is ultimately a gift you give yourself. And finally, the text emphasizes something that I think is absolutely crucial for long-term happiness. Never, ever taking your relationship for granted.
So it's not just about finding the right person, but about continuously choosing that person day after day.
Precisely. It's about actively reaffirming your commitment, not just assuming it. Whether it's through words of affirmation, small gestures of love, or making future plans together, it's about showing up for each other consistently and choosing to nurture that love. Relationships take work.
They do. It's so easy to fall into a routine and forget to put in that conscious effort. But this deep dive really highlights how crucial it is for maintaining a fulfilling and passionate relationship.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing journey, and I think this book offers a fantastic roadmap for navigating that journey together.
It really does. So as you go about your day today, we'll leave you with this thought. What's one small action you can take today, right now, to invest in your relationship? Remember, it's often those small, consistent gestures that have the biggest impact in the long run. Until next time, happy diving.